I cannot spend my life taking care of a broken man. Lauren's note read, and Matthew Carter's eyes scanned the sterile hospital room in disbelief as the rain tapped softly against the window, blurring the city lights of Nashville outside and reflecting the turmoil within. He tried to move his legs, but pain shot through his left knee, the cast heavy and awkward, reminding him of the car crash that had changed everything in an instant. And he felt the emptiness of the hospital bed, the absence of the hand he expected to hold his. And then the envelope caught his attention, stark white and simple, resting on the side table with the words "divorce" printed clearly, and Matthew swallowed hard, realizing Lauren had already made her choice, choosing Victor Hayes over the man lying wounded beside the force stand, a man who had believed in her, who had planned a life with her, who had imagined mornings with coffee together, and now those plans were shattered. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the room, a constant reminder of the months ahead of recovery. Yet it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest, the betrayal that cut deeper than any physical injury. And he remembered the last night before the crash, laughter in the small kitchen, the sound of her voice promising forever, and now only the echo of those words haunted him, hollow and distant, replaced by a note that might as well have been a final punctuation on their decade together. Matthew tried to steady his breathing, felt the drip of the $4 in his arm, and saw the shadows of the ceiling fan moving slowly across the white walls, each turn a mocking reminder of the life he once had. While nurses moved quietly outside the curtain, unaware of the internal collapse, the silent reckoning of a man who had been abandoned at his most vulnerable, who now faced the reality of being alone in a hospital room with nothing but the sound of rain, the beeping of monitors, and the bitter knowledge that everything he had worked for, the home, the savings, the shared dreams, was gone, swept away in Lauren's departure. Matthew's hands gripped the thin sheet as he recalled the wreck, the screech of tires, the glass, the crunch of metal. Yet surviving the physical trauma had been easier than surviving the emotional devastation. The realization that the woman he trusted had calculated her exit while he was unconscious, leaving only the note as testimony to her decision. And he thought of the months ahead of physical therapy, the slow, painful rebuild of his body, each movement a reminder of what he had lost, but also a spark of what he might reclaim. And somewhere under the pain, beneath the betrayal and loss, a quiet voice whispered that he would not be defined by this night, by this note, by the absence of Lauren. And as he lay staring at the rain-streaked window, Matthew Carter understood that the journey to rise again would be long, grueling, and solitary. Yet perhaps, in time, he could reclaim the life and dignity, stripped from him, one deliberate, aching step at a time, because the crash had taken his body temporarily, but it had not yet taken his spirit. The next morning, Matthew learned that Lauren had not simply left him. She had cleared the exits first. A nurse named Denise came in with a plastic cup of iced chips, her expression too careful, the kind people wear when they are carrying bad news that does not belong in a medical chart. "There is a billing issue," she said softly, placing a folder near the foot of the bed. Matthew tried to sit higher, but his left leg felt like it belonged to someone else, heavy under the cast, his ribs sore with every breath. "Billing?" he asked. Denise looked toward the door, then back at him. The card on file was declined. The words were small, almost administrative, but they landed harder than the crash. Matthew reached for his phone with fingers that still felt slow from medication and opened the banking app. Joint checking. Nearly empty. Joint savings. Gone. 2 transfers, both made while he had been unconscious, both directed to an account he did not recognize. The date stared back at him like a second injury. Same night as the crash. Same night he was being wheeled into emergency care under fluorescent lights while doctors spoke in clipped voices over his body. His hand tightened around the phone until the screen blurred. Then another message appeared from the insurance company about the Ford F-150. Policy update. Vehicle sold. Title transfer pending. For a moment, Matthew could not understand it. His truck was not just transportation. It was the first thing he had bought after 3 years of overtime. The truck he used to drive Lauren to Sunday breakfast, move her mother's furniture, haul lumber for the deck he never finished. She had sold it before he could even stand. That was when the betrayal became clean enough to see. Lauren had not panicked. She had planned. Later that afternoon, His younger cousin Beth came by with a duffel bag of clothes and a face swollen from crying. She stood at the edge of the room, twisting the strap of her purse, and said the house was almost empty. Lauren had taken the bedroom set, the television, the good cookware, the framed photographs from the hallway, even the leather recliner Matthew's father had given him before he passed. She said you two had already talked about it, Beth whispered. Matthew looked at the white ceiling tiles. We did not. Beth covered her mouth and looked away. He hated that most, not the missing furniture, not the bank balance, not even the truck. He hated making kind people witness what Lauren had done. By evening, the truth came in pieces. Victor Hayes had picked her up in a black Range Rover outside their house. Neighbors had seen movers. A locksmith had changed the front door. Lauren had blocked Matthew's number. The woman who once promised to build a life with him had removed every path back to it, while he was trapped in a hospital bed with a call button clipped to the sheet. He did not yell. He did not throw the phone. He did not ask Beth to call Lauren and beg for an explanation. He just turned his face toward the rain-streaked window and let the facts stack themselves in the quiet. There are moments when anger would be easier because anger gives you somewhere to put your hands. But Matthew had no room for anger yet. Pain took up too much space. The crash had broken bone, torn muscle, and stolen balance from his body. Lauren had taken the money, the truck, the furniture, the keys, and the future she no longer wanted to share. But as the hospital room settled into evening, and the monitor beeped beside him with patient indifference, Matthew understood something with a clarity that felt almost cruel. She had taken everything she could reach. She had not taken what she never knew how to value. By the time the evening sun slanted through the hospital blinds, Matthew Carter had begun to map the emptiness Lauren had left behind. Each corner of the room, each sterile scent, reminded him that she had taken more than material possessions. She had taken familiarity, routine, and the illusion of safety, leaving him to piece together the fragments of a life upended while he lay unconscious and vulnerable. A physical therapist, Jordan, arrived for the first session, clipboard in hand, offering gentle instructions for mobility exercises he had to perform while seated, stretching his legs and arms with painstaking caution. The weight of the cast limiting movement and reminding him of the accident that had started this chain of betrayals, and Matthew realized that recovery would not only be physical but emotional, that each bend, each lift, each cautious step in the hospital hallway was a reclamation of autonomy slowly wrested from him. And as he labored through the exercises, thoughts of Lauren's calculated departure crept into his mind. The fact that she had orchestrated a complete reset of their shared life while he was confined to a hospital bed, every piece of property transferred or sold, every key and account shifted to Victor Hayes, who now occupied the life Matthew had once considered secure, and yet in these quiet, grueling motions, he found an unfamiliar resilience, a capacity to confront the loss without collapse, to acknowledge that the woman who had left him for another man had underestimated his ability to endure and to grow. And when Jordan paused to offer encouragement, noting that his progress exceeded expectations for someone in his condition, Matthew felt a flicker of pride amidst the exhaustion, an internal spark that promised a future outside of Lauren's shadow. Later, when the room grew quieter and the monitors clicked in rhythmic cadence, he traced the outlines of his possessions in memory: the bedspread Lauren had once chosen, the chair she had adored, the little mementos she had packed away or left in his absence, and allowed himself a brief mourning for what had been lost, but also a cautious anticipation of what could be rebuilt, the understanding that life was a series of choices and actions, and while he had been deprived of his fair share by another's selfishness, he still retained the power to define his next steps. And as Matthew rested his hands on the smooth sheet, he imagined the process of reclaiming his life, one deliberate decision at a time, envisioning evenings not with Lauren's laughter echoing in his mind, but with the quiet knowledge that he could, in time, reconstruct a space of dignity, a life governed by his own will. And while the pain, betrayal, and isolation of the first few days still pressed heavily, he began to recognize the faint outlines of a horizon where recovery, patience, and careful effort might yield not the life he lost, but one more grounded in self-possession, resilience, and the potential for unexpected new beginnings. The hospital released Matthew on a Wednesday afternoon that smelled like disinfectant, rain, and paperwork. Beth drove him to the temporary apartment she had found above a small insurance office in Murfreesboro, because going back to the house Lauren had emptied felt like walking into a room after the fire was already out. The apartment had beige carpet, one narrow bedroom, a kitchenette with a humming refrigerator, and windows that looked over a parking lot striped with oil stains. It was not home. It was shelter. Sometimes shelter is all a man gets before he learns to build again. Beth helped him inside, set the duffel bag on the floor, and tried not to cry when she saw how slowly he moved with the walker. Every step was a negotiation. The left leg dragged behind pain. The right leg trembled from doing too much. His palms burned against the rubber grips. The hallway from the door to the couch could not have been more than 15 feet, but by the time he reached it, sweat had gathered at his temples and his breath came shallow. Recovery was not inspirational. It was ugly, slow, and unpaid. The first night alone taught him more than any doctor had. The bottle of water on the counter might as well have been across the state. The bathroom felt too far. The microwave buttons blurred when medication made his head heavy. He dropped a spoon and stared at it for almost a full minute before deciding whether picking it up was worth the effort. That was the part no one put on greeting cards. Survival was not one heroic moment. It was 1,000 humiliating little choices made when nobody was there to clap. At 2 a.m, he woke with his legs stiff and his back aching from the cheap couch. For a few seconds, he forgot Lauren was gone. He turned his head toward the empty side of the room and almost called her name. The silence answered first. Then memory followed. The note. The transfers. The truck. Victor Hayes. Matthew closed his eyes until the wave passed, then pushed himself upright, inch by inch, refusing to let grief turn the apartment into another hospital bed. The next morning, Dr. Samuel Reed met him at the rehab clinic, a square building behind a pharmacy with motivational posters on the walls and floors polished by years of painful progress. Dr. Reed was in his late 50s, calm, direct, the kind of man who did not dress hope up too pretty. He watched Matthew grip the parallel bars and said, "We are not chasing miracles here. We are chasing one honest step at a time." Matthew liked him immediately. The first step felt impossible. The second felt personal. By the fifth, his arms shook so badly he had to stop. Dr. Reed did not pity him. He handed him water and said, "Again when you are ready." Weeks became measured in inches. Bend the knee 3 degrees farther. Stand 10 seconds longer. Walk to the clinic door without sitting. Pay 1 overdue bill. Cook 1 real meal. Sleep 1 night without reading the note again. Beth brought groceries. Dr. Reed brought discipline. Matthew brought the only thing Lauren had failed to take because she had never bothered to recognize it: endurance. During those sessions, he noticed things other patients struggled with. A woman who did not know how to adjust her home walker. A veteran waiting 3 weeks for a shower chair. An older man sent home with equipment no one had explained. Matthew began writing notes in a cheap spiral notebook, not because he had a plan yet, but because pain had made him observant. He knew what it felt like to be released into a life that no longer fit your body. He knew what it felt like to need help and hate needing it. One afternoon, after a session left him trembling and furious, Dr. Reed glanced at the notebook and asked what he was writing. Matthew looked at the page, at the list of problems no one seemed paid enough to solve, and answered honestly. Things people should not have to figure out alone. Dr. Reed nodded slowly. That is how good work starts. Matthew did not understand then that those scribbled notes would become the first bones of a future. He only knew that every time he stood back up, Lauren's sentence got a little smaller. Broken man. Maybe. But broken things can teach you where the pressure was hidden. And sometimes, if a man is patient enough, the rebuild becomes stronger than the life that collapsed. By the time Matthew settled into the small apartment, the rhythm of rebuilding a life became painfully clear. Mornings were measured by the struggle to navigate the narrow hallway without assistance. Every step a negotiation between strength and fatigue, while afternoons were consumed with therapy sessions that tested patience, endurance, and the limits of both body and mind. Each exercise a reminder that recovery was not instantaneous but cumulative, a series of small victories stacked upon each other. And as he maneuvered through parallel bars and stretching routines under Dr. Reed's calm, precise guidance, Matthew became acutely aware of the contrast between the life he had lost and the one he was slowly reclaiming. That the furniture stolen, the bank accounts emptied, and the shared spaces Lauren had abandoned were just tangible reminders of a deeper void left behind. Yet within that void, he discovered an unexpected resourcefulness, a determination to act within his limitations, to measure progress not by the absence of pain, but by the ability to endure it and continue. And each evening, when he returned to the apartment, he faced tasks that once seemed mundane but now required careful planning. Cooking a simple meal, navigating from the kitchenette to the bedroom without faltering, managing medications and personal hygiene with meticulous attention, all of which reinforced a growing self-reliance. The understanding that while others had removed his security, they could not remove his capacity for patience, reflection, and action. And in the quiet hours, as he sat on the edge of the couch noting his achievements in a tattered spiral notebook, Matthew contemplated the architecture of his recovery, the deliberate steps and small adaptations that would form the foundation of a life that could be lived on his own terms. The past no longer dictating each decision, but informing a cautious, deliberate strategy for moving forward. And even as frustration and longing for what was lost occasionally rose, he acknowledged these emotions without surrendering to them, integrating them into a mindset focused on resilience and incremental progress, understanding that every meal prepared, every hallway crossed, every therapy milestone achieved, and every note jotted down in the spiral notebook was a claim to agency, a quiet but firm assertion that despite the betrayals, the losses, and the disorientation brought by the accident and Lauren's calculated absence, he was steadily, inevitably, reclaiming the contours of a life defined not by what had been taken from him, but by what he could now build with patience, deliberate effort, and the unyielding resolve to persist. 10 years later, Matthew Carter kept the old Ford key in the top drawer of his desk, not because he wanted the truck back, but because some losses deserve a witness. The key no longer opened anything. Lauren had sold the F-150 before he could stand, before he could sign his own discharge papers, before he could look her in the eye and ask how long she had been planning to leave. But every time his fingers touched that worn metal, he remembered the hospital window, the white envelope, and the sentence that tried to name him forever. Broken man. It was strange how small those words looked after a decade of work. Carter Mobility Solutions occupied a renovated warehouse outside Franklin now, 42,000 square feet of loading bays, training rooms, customer support desks, and shelves lined with home recovery equipment going out across Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Kentucky. The company had started with one storage unit, 3 refurbished walkers, and Matthew's spiral notebook full of things people should not have to figure out alone. Grace Miller came into the story during the second year, when she was still managing regional distribution for a medical supply company and visited Dr. Reed's clinic to solve a delivery problem no one else cared about. She found Matthew at a folding table, explaining to an older patient how to adjust a shower chair so it would not wobble. Grace watched for 5 minutes, then said, "You understand the customer better than my entire sales department." He almost laughed. I was the customer. That was the beginning. Not romantic, not dramatic, just useful. Grace knew supply chains, vendor contracts, insurance paperwork, and how to make a small operation look credible before it felt credible. Matthew knew pain, dignity, and the quiet panic of being sent home with equipment and no instructions. Together, they built something neither of them could have built alone. The first year nearly folded them. The second year kept the lights on. By the 5th, hospitals were calling them instead of the other way around. By the 10th, Matthew walked through his warehouse with only a slight stiffness on cold mornings, nodding to employees who called him Mr. Carter even though he still preferred Matthew. He lived in a quiet house on the edge of Franklin, with a back porch facing old oak trees and enough silence to feel earned. He did not date much. He did not talk about Lauren unless legal paperwork required a history. He did not hate her anymore, which surprised him more than anger ever had. Hate keeps someone in the room. Matthew had worked too hard to make sure she no longer had a chair. On rainy days, his knee still ached where the crash had left its signature. He would pause near the office window, watching water bead on the glass, and remember the version of himself who once believed survival meant returning to what was taken. He knew better now. Survival meant building something the theft could not touch. That Thursday evening, a storm rolled over Franklin just after closing. Most of the staff had gone home, and Grace had left a stack of quarterly reports on his desk with a sticky note that said, "Do not stay all night." Matthew smiled, locked the warehouse, and drove home through streets shining under porch lights and wet branches. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway. He sat for a moment, listening to the rain tap the roof of his SUV, then reached for his briefcase. That was when the doorbell camera alerted on his phone. A woman stood under his porch light, soaked through her coat, a small suitcase beside her feet. For a second, the screen felt like a memory glitch. Then she lifted her face. Lauren. 10 years had changed her. Not cruelly. Honestly, the sharp polish was gone, replaced by tired eyes, damp hair, and a mouth that looked like it had practiced pride until pride stopped paying rent. Matthew watched the screen in silence as she pressed the bell again. He did not move right away. Rain ran off the porch roof behind her like the hospital window had followed him home. Then her voice came through the speaker, thin and shaking. "Matthew, I had nowhere else to go." The old key sat in his desk drawer inside, useless and waiting. Matthew looked at the woman who once took every exit from him and now stood at the only door she remembered, and he understood that 10 years had not brought her back to him. It had brought her back to the man she thought would still open. Matthew stood in the driveway with rain tapping against his shoulders, watching Lauren through the doorbell camera instead of through memory, and that small distance mattered. 10 years earlier, he would have opened the door before the second ring, no questions asked, because love had trained him to move toward her pain faster than his own. That man had existed in hospital rooms, unpaid bills, empty houses, and long nights where the couch felt wider than any bed. But that man had also learned to walk again. Slowly, painfully, without her. He stepped out of the SUV, briefcase in one hand, keys in the other, and walked toward the porch. Lauren turned when she heard him, clutching the handle of the small suitcase beside her feet. The porch light made the rain shine in her hair. "Matthew," she said, and his name came out like a prayer she did not fully believe she deserved. He stopped at the bottom step. "Lauren." One word. No anger. No warmth. Just recognition. Her eyes moved over him, taking in the tailored coat, the steady posture, the man who no longer looked like someone waiting to be chosen. "You look good," she whispered. He almost said nothing. Then he thought of the note beside the hospital bed and answered honestly. "I had to." Her face tightened. The rain filled the silence between them. "Victor is gone," she said. "He lost everything. The investment company, the house, the accounts. There are lawsuits. I did not know how bad it was until it was too late." Matthew looked at the suitcase. "And now you came here." She nodded, tears mixing with rain until it was hard to tell what belonged to weather and what belonged to regret. "I know I have no right. I know what I did was terrible, but I have nowhere to sleep tonight. I thought maybe, after everything we had." Her voice broke on the word everything, and for a moment he saw the younger woman from their old kitchen, laughing barefoot while pancakes burned in the pan, pretending broke was romantic because hope still had a roof. That memory stepped forward. Matthew let it. Then he let it pass. "Come inside for a few minutes," he said. Lauren looked surprised, almost relieved, but he held up one hand before she moved. "A few minutes. Not the night." The relief faltered. "Good. Boundaries should be clear before compassion enters the room." Inside, the house was warm and quiet, lit by a single lamp near the living room window. Lauren stood just inside the door, dripping onto the mat, looking around at the clean lines, the framed company award on the shelf, the photos of staff events, the life built in the space where she had once left an empty account. "You really did it," she said softly. "You built all this." Matthew took 2 towels from the hall closet and handed her one. "No," he said. "I built something else first." She looked at him. "What?" "A life that did not need you to come back for it to feel complete." The sentence landed gently, which made it harder. Lauren lowered her eyes. "I deserve that. This is not about what you deserve." He set his briefcase on the coffee table and sat in the chair across from the couch, not beside her. Another distance. Another line. "Tell me why you are here." She sat slowly, hands wrapped around the towel, suitcase still by the door like an argument waiting for permission. "Victor used me," she said. "He had me sign things. Loans. Guarantees. I thought we were investing. I thought he knew what he was doing. When it fell apart, He left. He said I should call someone who still cared about me. Matthew looked at her for a long moment. There it was. Not love finding its way home. Not remorse walking 10 years through rain. A man had run out of exits and pointed her toward the one door he assumed would still open. And you thought that was me? Matthew said. Lauren's mouth trembled. I hoped it was. He leaned back, the old ache in his knee waking as thunder rolled somewhere beyond the trees. The body remembers storms. So does the heart. You left me in a hospital bed, he said. You emptied the accounts while I was unconscious. You sold my truck before I could stand. You changed the locks before I came home. She pressed the towel to her mouth. I was scared. Matthew nodded slowly. Fear does not sell a man's truck. The room went still. Outside, rain covered the windows in silver lines. Lauren closed her eyes, and this time, she had no answer polished enough to survive the truth. Matthew stood by the large living room window, watching the first pale light of dawn touch the city skyline, thinking about the years lost and how quiet his apartment felt without the chaos Lauren had once brought. The coffee machine hissed gently behind him as he prepared 2 mugs, one for himself and one for her if she wanted, the air still carrying the scent of rain from the night before. And he wondered if she realized how much time had passed, how much he had changed, how he had learned. To fill the void she left with purpose rather than emptiness. The soft click of her heels on the polished floor startled him slightly, and he turned to see her standing there with her coat clutched tightly around her, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, realizing that Matthew had built a life without her, and yet here she was, attempting to step back in, hands trembling just enough to betray the calm she tried to show. And he gestured toward the empty chair across from him, maintaining distance as he had promised himself he would, letting her sit and breathe, both of them silent for a few moments, feeling the weight of unspoken words, the tension of decades compressed into these few minutes. The hum of the city outside, a distant reminder of lives continuing beyond their own. Matthew finally spoke in measured tones, asking about the choices she had made, why she had returned now, and Lauren, voice soft and almost reverent, recounted the unraveling of her past, the collapse of her life after the man she had left him for had abandoned her, the details precise but devoid of malice, a story of consequence rather than revenge, and he listened without interruption, measuring her expressions, noting the subtle signs of remorse, the small gestures of regret, the way her hands fidgeted with the edges of her coat, and he reflected on the irony of life bringing her back to him. A man who had rebuilt his world meticulously in her absence, who had found strength in solitude and resilience in repetition, and he asked questions not to interrogate, but to understand, to gauge the sincerity of her presence, while she answered cautiously, aware of the barriers he had set, describing her efforts to make amends, to explain herself, to reclaim a fragment of dignity, the room still filled with the quiet hum of the morning, the rain-scented air a witness to their encounter. And Matthew, mindful of the boundaries he had promised himself, accepted her words with a nod. A measured acknowledgement rather than forgiveness, a gesture of control over his emotions, and Lauren, sensing the subtle shift in atmosphere, allowed herself a small sigh, realizing that while she had returned to the space they had once shared, the dynamics had irrevocably changed, the man before her no longer the one who would blindly welcome her back, and together they sat in silence. 2 people bound by history and consequence, the apartment holding the echoes of their shared past, and, outside, the city moved onward, indifferent yet steady, a backdrop to their tentative reconciliation, a quiet dance of understanding and restraint, a moment suspended between the past and the present, teaching them both about patience, reflection, and the careful navigation of human connection. As the evening light softened through the blinds, Matthew and Lauren sat across from each other, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air, and Matthew finally broke the silence, asking her gently about the lessons she had learned over the past decade, the choices she regretted, and the moments she wished she could reclaim, while Lauren spoke with sincerity, describing how life had humbled her, how she realized that her previous decisions had consequences beyond her control, and how she had grown to appreciate the patience and resilience Matthew had demonstrated. Their conversation flowing with a mixture of tension and understanding, each word measured, each pause intentional, as they navigated the delicate terrain of past betrayals and newfound awareness. the room quiet except for the distant hum of the city outside. And Matthew, mindful of his emotions, acknowledged her insights without judgment, demonstrating that while trust would take time to rebuild, respect could exist in the present moment. Lauren, in turn, nodded, understanding that forgiveness was a process rather than an instant, and as they shared these moments, they both recognized the complexity of human relationships, the need for empathy, and the possibility of reconciliation without erasing history. And in this reflective atmosphere, Matthew looked up and asked, "How do you think others would feel if they witnessed this encounter, seeing the choices, the regrets, and the growth?" Prompting Lauren to consider the perspectives of strangers, the audience of their lives, and their shared narrative. And as their discussion concluded, he added with a gentle smile, "If you have found value in understanding our journey, consider following along for more stories that explore the intricacies of relationships and human growth, offering insights into how people navigate the consequences of their decisions and the chance to reflect on your own experiences, leaving viewers to ponder the emotional depth of the story, the resilience required to move forward, and the subtle power of shared understanding, encouraging reflection on personal choices, empathy toward others, and the impact of time on relationships, while inviting them to continue exploring narratives filled with introspection, emotional complexity, and the lessons that life teaches when confronted with the unexpected return of someone once thought lost, ultimately fostering a deeper appreciation for the nuances of human connection and the enduring value of patience, compassion, and careful listening in the journey of life.